I'm Dr. James Wright. I hold a master's degree in business administration and a PhD in educational administration. In Surviving the Past and the Future, Stories from the Heirs of the Great Migration is my narrative biography, grounded in my family's migration from the former slaveholding turned sharecropping South to the factory jobs in the North. These are the stories of what happened to us, the next generation, the heirs of that exodus. We, the offspring of our ancestors, were the first of our lineage, born with all of the rights post-1960 civil rights. By 1994, the crime bill rebooted a dark American past by generating an epidemic of mass incarceration, which snatched millions of black men and boys from their families and communities and branding them felons. My own chapter of life began as a native of Waterbury, Connecticut, a blue-collar urban city in the shadows of New York City.
It's a state of dynamic economic growth, rich in variety and full of opportunity. A modern expressway leads past the U.S. rubber and Naugatuck chemical plants to Waterbury, the industrial and business center of the valley. The urban centers and their industries are only minutes away from highly desirable suburban communities, which provide ample variety in residential choice for workers and executives alike.
The city that drew my folks there, with the numerous factory offerings and residential suburbs, changed over the years as I grew up. The effects of deindustrialization, the crack cocaine epidemic, mass incarceration, and widespread corruption amongst elected officials caused many of the heirs of the Great Migration there to eventually return south. My story starts with my maternal great-grandfather, John Sunnyman Bumpers. He left North Carolina in 1940 for Harlem. 23 years later, his daughter, my grandmother, and her 7 young daughters left behind sharecropping in North Carolina. Many in my family eventually became entrepreneurs in Waterbury. They owned stores and homes and became landlords, aside from working in the factories. It was my Aunt Maxine's husband, Bruce, along with my Uncle Cheryl, who later drove from Waterbury down to Youngsville, North Carolina, to get my grandmother and her 7 young daughters. I wanted to know, how did 10 people and all of their belongings make it out of North Carolina in one car? My Uncle Bruce explained to me that they were all, quote, skinny and relatively malnourished and had very little means to transport, so they all fit cleanly into his full-sized 1956 Buick Roadmaster. Because her family was made up of sharecroppers, my mother's earliest memories were working on the farm as young as 4 years old. This is where the collective journey in Waterbury started, the house on Cherry Street near downtown Waterbury. All those houses are torn down now, yet back then that area was live. There were factories all over the place, factory housing for the workers. The city was jumping. By 1985, the New York Times described Waterbury as one of the most important industrial centers in the country and, quote, the 19th century version of today's Silicon Valley. But see, that was a past that I had never known. I was born in a building located at 1853 North Main Street on the top of a restaurant called the Sugar Bowl. The spot would later become a point of reference for the mid part of North Main and the corner of East Farm Streets. It was such a central and influential presence that the area long after the Sugar Bowl restaurant itself closed was just known as the Bowl, the main arteries of black culture in Waterbury. That all took a turn for the worse when crack cocaine hit. I always talk about life in Waterbury, BC, before crack, life before everything changed. We started to see individuals who were pillars in our community get addicted. The strongest men fell apart from crack fiending. The post-Waterbury successful me carries the memories and scars of a significant amount of turmoil lived on those streets. I had been many versions of a young man, from a relatively petty local drug dealer to a prison inmate, and even an ambitious musician/music mogul. How can you build a successful life out of a dying city? What did my folks coming up before me think that I would become, based on options that were there as I was being raised? The year I graduated from Wilby High School in 1992. Money Magazine conducted a report about the best cities to live and grow up in within the United States of America. Apparently, I was not in one of those cities. Its annual survey of the best and worst places to live rated the city of Waterbury number 300 out of 300. How did I end up in the worst ranked metropolitan city in the country my senior year in a failing high school, growing up in one of its worst neighborhoods? Friends and even family could not escape the drug abuse and the possibility of prison all around us. What in this environment inspired me to somehow get out and make a name for myself? The children of the Great Migration, my family at least, inherited little to no wealth, not much education, and little guidance towards any. We did not inherit much wisdom or advice on navigating bigoted police patrols. As an adult, I interpreted these lessons in various ways because, to an extent, they couldn't physically fight back against their white oppressors in the South, not without grave repercussions, especially in the midst of a heightened lynching epidemic. America always had been a battleground where the fight for black liberty and life could lead to death. We wound up in a police state. Our neighborhoods and communities were under constant occupation. And our ancestors had no language for that, no strategies for the economic traps, the deindustrialization accompanied by tidal waves of cocaine and a burgeoning crack epidemic and a mass incarceration to follow. They couldn't help us through this new version of oppression with anything but what they gave us. Reflecting upon these stories led me from the roots up to myself and my cousin's generation. After 1965, with rights our elders had never known, and Jim Crow but an old whisper. Here we are. But what would these new sons of Waterbury be like with so much freedom in the shadows of dying factories as their only inheritance? In 2003, I managed to find my way to Egypt, searching for a new beginning and a spiritual awakening. In Egypt, I got married, I fathered 3 sons, and was embraced by Nubian Egyptian in-laws who essentially saved my life. I returned to the United States after 6 years abroad, and I completed all of my education. I am currently a full-time professor in Southern California. It was a family wedding in 2018 that finally brought me back to Waterbury and to a series of losses such as my close cousin Trey and my beloved mother. Both died within 6 months of one another after my return to the city. During my time in Waterbury at the wedding, the stories, pictures, and reflections began pouring out into the research of our family's path, which is so familiar to us, heirs of that migration, and what we've endured just to continue the saga. Those of us still surviving the past and the future.